Welcome to the Vegan Pulse. I am your host, Nancy Arenas. We are welcoming back Gabriel Gaarden for another segment of Making Sense with Gabriel. Stick around. We'll be right back. Welcome back, Gabriel Gaarden. It's time for Making Sense with Gabriel. Hi.
Ready to go. Hi, Nancy.
Tell me, what are the common pitfalls of people going vegan without the proper research?
Wow, great question. Let me think of how to organize this answer. So I just addressed this in one of our recent episodes, which will go up, which was, I'm worried about when I give up meat that I might not have energy on a vegan diet. And so common pitfalls. Number one, a lot of people, when they transition to a plant-based diet, think of your plate, right? But if you've got a slab of meat on there, say roast beef, say steak, say a pork chop, say a chicken breast, and then you've got maybe a side of potatoes, and then you've got maybe a little bit of veg on there, would be kind of a standard American plate, right? You might have some corn, you might have some peas, or even better than those, you might have like some broccoli or some dark leafy greens like collards or kale, whatever it may be. But you've got some kind of a starch or a grain with your protein, your meat, and then some kind of veg. When you transition from eating a standard kind of American diet to eating an, exclusively plant-based diet, and especially if it's more leaning toward the whole food plant-based end of the spectrum, so eating more whole, minimally processed plants instead of eating a lot of things like the meat analogs, right? So the Beyond Burgers, the Beyond Chicken Strips, and I don't want to just rag on Beyond, by no means. That's a really good thing when you're transitioning from a plant-based diet, or if you like those kind of meaty substances and you miss them from, the diet that you were used to for 2 decades, 5 decades, whatever it was before you transitioned to a more plant-based or vegan diet. But those meat analogs are very similar to animal products in terms of their calorie density. So I eat a Beyond Burger, I'm going to get a similar amount of protein and fat and different calories in things that I would get in a meat burger. And it's certainly going to be healthier to eat the plant-based alternative, right? But when you transition to eating more legumes, whole intact grains, fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds, besides from the nuts and seeds, which happen to be very rich in calories, very high in calorie density, the other foods at the other end, the other whole plant foods like the legumes, which are your beans, your split peas, your chickpeas, your lentils, stuff like that. Those foods are much lower in calorie density. And so to get the same amount of calories that you would need to get, to meet your calorie needs for the day, you need to consume more of that food, right? So no longer you're looking at the plate and I need to put more food on that plate to get a similar amount of nutrition in terms of my calories and in terms of the food that I need to maintain good energy levels throughout the day. And that's a wonderful thing because, of course, most Americans, 70% or so of Americans are overweight or obese. And then specifically, I think it's getting up toward the high 30s, even close to 35 or maybe even 38, I can't remember, percent of Americans are now obese, right? And so a vast majority of Americans are overweight or obese, and that's a big issue. And so, of course, that means they're taking in more than they need. But with a plant-based diet, you can consume more food without consuming too many calories because it's so much lower in calorie density. So that's a wonderful thing. So you can't think about eating the same amount of food on that plate that you did in the decades that preceded your transition to a plant-based vegan diet. Eat more food if you're if you're struggling with low energy, whatever it may be. What are some other pitfalls? Well, in terms of specific nutrients, go ahead.
I was going to say, I have to confess, 15, 17 years ago, I tried to go vegetarian. And after a month, I gave it up. I was convinced, like everybody else, I can never live off of this. But what happened is that I ate pasta, I ate salad because I didn't know. I thought, okay, all I have to eat is pasta and salad. So that's what I'm
exactly. And so that's another thing, right? Variety is key. We can live very simply, but I mentioned all those food groups before: legumes, whole intact grains, vegetables, fruits, nuts, seeds, and then herbs and spices. And specifically the herbs and spices, when it comes to maintaining more variety, you know, spices, and then a variety of all these different foods. We can cook Asian, we can cook Middle Eastern, we can cook East Indian, we can cook Latin American food, whether it's Caribbean, whether it's a Mexican type dish, whether it's a South American, like a Peruvian type dish, right? The number of cuisines that we have access to, North African, Moroccan, you know, the Moroccans have wonderful spice mixtures that they use, from cinnamon to cumin to cumin to coriander. I combined cumin and coriander in there. My bad. Wonderful spices, right? And then wonderful mixtures of all these different types of whole plant foods, your legumes, your whole intact grains, your vegetables, and your fruits. And then using things like nuts and seeds, which are very high in calorie density. So we don't want to just be eating nuts and seeds all day. If we do that, we're probably going to be overweight or obese, even though they're wonderfully healthy foods. But we want to use those high calorie foods to add texture and variety and crunch and mouthfeel to keep our meals, you know, spicy and flavorful and varied, right? Because that's going to keep us excited. That's going to keep us feeling satisfied long term, so that we don't lead to that burnout, essentially, where it's like, oh, I've just been eating potatoes and brown rice and some pasta with a little bit of pasta sauce on it, you know, every day, and I'm just sick of that. And so I'm missing, you know, my cheeseburgers and fries or whatever I used to eat. And so that you revert back to your old ways of eating. So, you know, keep it varied, and there's endless resources out there for great recipes, right? And you can certainly, I'm sure, you know, there's just so many resources. I don't want to try to list a bunch off the top of my head. And then another thing, common pitfalls in terms of nutrient needs, there's one particular vitamin, that's B12, that unless you're consuming fortified foods, right? So you can consume nutritional yeast, and nutritional yeast, you know, depending on the brand, but most brands of nutritional yeast are going to fortify it with a number of vitamins. One of those is B12, and B12, you know, outside of fortification, you're not going to get enough B12 on a vegan diet. And so that's one of the biggest pitfalls that vegans will find, is unless you're consuming some type of like a plant-based drink, like I think some of the plant-based milks have B12, but don't quote me on that. You have to read the label. But I think some of the drinks do, the beverages, as well as some foods are going to have fortification. But you really need to be eating fortified foods probably at every meal to make sure that you're going to get enough B12 from those fortified foods to maintain adequate B12 levels in the body. What I recommend is just take a supplement, right? They're dirt cheap. You can take as little as 2,500 or so milligrams per week. Some B12 supplements have as much as like 2,500. I think I might have said milligrams. I meant to say micrograms. They come in micrograms, which is smaller than a milligram. But you can take as little as like one of those is a week, as long as it has 2,500 micrograms in each supplement. If not, you can take it like every other day if you have a supplement that has about 1,000 micrograms of B12 in it, or you can take it every day. It's a water soluble vitamin. So what you don't need, you're just going to end up excreting through your urine. But B12 is a critical nutrient that you have to make sure you're getting in your diet. If we look at our ancestors, and this is a common thing where people want to, you know, down vegan diets, where they say, oh, because vegan diets don't have B12, that means that they're really not sufficient for the human body. No, if you go back thousands of years, before we had our modern food system where we sanitize everything, where we chlorinate all of our water, which kills all the bacteria, you would have naturally gotten B12 without eating animals, right? Animals get B12 from the soil, just like we would have gotten B12 from the soil before we washed and sanitized all of our foods and drinks. But because we live in such a clean system now, which is really great from a number of perspectives, right? People don't get cholera anymore when they drink unclean water, which means they don't die. But that also means, because we chlorinate our water, that we're not going to get any B12 in our water. And so we just need to make sure to consume a supplement. It's safe, it's easy, it's effective, and it's also cheap. So B12 is one thing that you definitely want to supplement. On top of that, make sure you're getting enough to eat every day, like I mentioned before, and then make sure you're eating a variety of all these different foods and utilizing those herbs and spices, because that's going to keep things tasting great. That's going to keep you from burning out. and you're just going to live vegan and love every minute of it. Thank you.
I know I do. Love living
Me
vegan.
too.
Well, thank you again, Gabriel, for all your knowledge and sharing it with the audience. We'll see you
Thank you,
again.
Nancy. Wonderful to be here.
We'll see you again. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of the Vegan Pulse. I am your host, Nancy Arenas. Remember to follow us on Facebook, like us too. Check out our blog and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You'll never miss another episode. If you have a pulse, you have a purpose. Live vegan.